So, who was Eric Havelock? He was a British classicist, a scholar who spent his life studying the ancient world of Greece, Rome. But Havelock was not just any academic. He proposed a truly radical idea. It fundamentally changed how we understand Plato. Havelock's central argument was put forward in his 1963 book, Preface to Plato. He said Plato did not just introduce new philosophical concepts. Instead, Plato sat at the heart of a massive cognitive revolution. Plato's work marked a crucial shift from an oral tradition, speaking, listening, to a culture founded on the written word, abstract thought. This was a monumental change, not just in communication, but in the very wiring of the human mind. Havelock's life, London-born, Cambridge-educated, later teaching in Canada and at Harvard and Yale, shaped a perspective that saw beyond texts to the culture that produced them. Imagine daily life in ancient Greece around the 8th to 5th centuries BCE. It was a world buzzing with sound. In the agora, you wouldn't find people reading newspapers. You'd hear merchants shouting their prices. You'd hear politicians delivering passionate speeches. You'd hear citizens arguing about law and policy. News moved by word of mouth, by heralds, by travelers, by gossiping neighbors. Communication was immediate, personal, overwhelmingly auditory. A society built on the power of the spoken word. Education looked different from our classrooms filled with textbooks. Young Greeks learned by listening, by repeating. They memorized long passages of poetry, especially Homer. These poems were the encyclopedias of their time, lessons on morality, guides to proper social conduct, histories, and practical knowledge. The poet was the ultimate teacher. Memorization was key. Learning was social and performative, often with music and group recitation. Abstract ideas like justice and courage lived in stories. Achilles at Troy for courage, Odysseus and the suitors for justice. Identity was collective, shaped by shared stories at festivals and drinking parties. Truth was held in common, reinforced in public performance, a sophisticated system preserving identity without widespread literacy. The works of Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, stood at the absolute center of this oral world. To the ancient Greeks, these were not just poems. They were the ultimate repository of their culture, a tribal encyclopedia. Within rhythmic verses, one found everything a Greek needed to know about being a Greek. Theology, history, and a manual for living. The gods and their dealings with mortals, a historical record. The Trojan War. Etiquette, political assembly, military tactics, and personal honor. Homer was the teacher of all Greece. Professional reciters, rhapsodes, performed the epics from memory over several days at festivals and public gatherings. Havelock argued the structure was mnemonic technology, dactylic hexameter, repeated stock phrases, swift-footed Achilles, rosy-fingered dawn, and formulaic patterns. Knowledge was in flux, a living performance. Core stories stayed, but each rhapsode added flourishes. The audience was active, engaged in remembering. Emotional charge mattered. Feel Achilles' rage, weep for Hector, celebrate Odysseus' cunning. Identification was the primary mode of learning. You didn't analyze courage, you felt it. There was no single authoritative Homer text. The poems lived in shared memory and performances, creating an associative narrative mindset. People thought in stories, characters, actions. Into this world of sound and story stepped Plato. And he was not impressed. In his most famous work, The Republic, Plato launches a comprehensive attack on poetry, with Homer as his primary target, even arguing for expelling the poets from his ideal state. To a modern reader, this can seem bizarre. Why would a philosopher want to ban art? Through Havelock's lens, Plato's move becomes clear. He was declaring war on Greece's educational system, the tribal encyclopedia Homer represented. Plato's main criticism: poetry appealed to the emotions, the irrational parts of the soul, rather than reason. Mimesis, imitation, made people identify with flawed characters and their outbursts, bypassing logical thought. Plato thought this was dangerous. True knowledge came from calm, detached, rational inquiry, not the emotional roller coaster that clouded the mind and blocked grasping the forms. Poets weren't reliable. They imitate without expertise. Poetry is a second-hand, distorted copy, far from the pure forms. The poet creates phantoms, far from the truth. This challenged Homer as teacher and called for a new technology of knowledge. Writing. Havelock. Plato's project relied on rising literacy. Writing separates ideas from speech. A written text is fixed. It can be studied, analyzed, cross-referenced, debated. Writing encourages stepping back and thinking critically. The shift from an oral to a literate culture, which Plato championed, had profound and irreversible consequences for how human beings thought. Eric Havelock argued that learning to read and write rewired the brain. Literacy fosters abstract thought. Justice is no longer just a hero's story. It becomes an abstract principle to be analyzed on its own terms, enabling systematic bodies of knowledge, philosophy, science, law. The written word lets us build complex arguments step by step and preserve them for future scrutiny. Plato's Academy, founded around 387 BCE, became a prototype for the modern university. Knowledge pursued through reading, writing, and structured dialectic, not memorized poetry. Curricula shifted to mathematics, logic, philosophy. The ideal student analyzed texts and constructed logical arguments. A new intellectual emerged, contemplative, critically examining written ideas. Havelock reshaped history, classics, and media studies, reminding us technologies are not neutral. He influenced Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message. The Greek miracle was also technological. Today's shift from print to digital echoes that past, changing how information is stored, shared, and processed. A change in our primary mode of communication is never just a change in tools. It changes who we are, how we learn, how we perceive reality.